Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Tales of Recovery. This is Gris Alves, your host, and my guest today is Jano Galindo, a local yoga teacher who I deeply admire and love taking your classes. And I'm so excited that you're here. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate you taking some time to talk with me.
Oh, yes. I think I've been really interested in hearing about just your process and how you got to, you know, well, to the point where you're at where I mean, I've been taking yoga in San Diego for 20 years,
Mm-hmm.
right? Lots of different teachers traveling everywhere. But when we finally went to your class, I was like, no way, dude, this is yoga,
Wow.
you know?
Uh,
And so, I mean, not that the other yoga teachers out there are good,
of course.
but I connected with this energy, which is why Hano and I are going to be actually collaborating in a retreat here coming up in May.
Mm-hmm.
Open to everyone, men, women. It's not specifically for couples, but it's for everybody.
Absolutely.
And I'm really excited to have you come and hold, the masculine energy, which I feel you just balance so well. You know.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I mean, it's been a long time, and I've always felt very blessed and fortunate to be able to share my craft and sort of study yoga in this way, to be able to teach it and learn every time I do teach. And yeah, I'm really excited to be able to be down in Mexico with you and yeah, and like share that energy in that space with you and bring some of that masculine positive energy to that environment.
Yeah. Especially because like the way, I guess maybe just the way I grew up, in like Mexican and
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a lot of men go to yoga now, but it's really beautiful to see. And I see it, I've seen it kind of even in Julio,
Mm-hmm.
my partner.
Absolutely.
That this shift that's happening where, yeah, you can soften, but you're also this strong, fuerte, o sea, this strong power. It's not like you're. So anyway, we'll be doing a lot of that work at the retreat and
Yeah.
maybe even talking about it here today. But
Mm-hmm.
to get started, can you tell us like where you're from? ¿Qué pasó? How
Yeah.
did you get to yoga? Todo?
Yeah. I mean, I'm born and raised from San Diego.
Okay.
I grew up in Bonita, Chula Vista area. That's where I'm at now. My story with yoga is really interesting. I was a musician first and foremost, and that's where I started. I was playing drums in like marching band and high school band, and I went off into college and did some professional marching drum corps stuff. And so when I was playing, I realized that at a point my body started to take over. And from that point is sort of like the aha moment where I could see myself breathing in a certain way. My body was sort of like doing things on its own to sustain the sort of level of energy that I needed to be able to play at that level. So that was sort of my first aha and awakening. From there I started doing breathing and meditation, and this is like when I was maybe 18, 19, 17, 18, 19, around that age. Mm-hmm. I always had a really strong spiritual background, and I always felt a very strong connection to spirit. Raised religious, Catholic mom and all that stuff, but never really like identified with it, resonated with it. So once I stopped playing music is when I really got into yoga. And it started with the breathing, started with the meditation. I had a little book that I found, is a Deepak Chopra book.
Mm-hmm.
And in the middle of it, it had 2 pictures of sun salutations. And I would just do them in my backyard. At this time, I was living in Los Angeles. And every day I would just wake up, do some breathing, some meditation, and some movement in my backyard. And that was it. I moved back to San Diego. And at that time, I ran into my really good friend that I grew up with. His name's Christian. And
the guy you go to Bali with?
Yeah, he lives in Bali now. And he was opening up the Chula Vista Yoga Center. And at that time, I had never taken a class. Like, I'd never been in a studio, never done anything like that. And so he's like, hey, I'm opening up a studio. You should come take class. And I was like, perfect. Like, I've been practicing. And so, like, there was a period of time before the studio opened that he kind of took me under his wing and taught me a lot of things and showed me a lot of things. And what I realized was that, like, it was very natural for me.
Right. Yeah.
So at that point, like, he invited me to take the very first class before the studio opened, and it was just a group of friends, and at the time it was Bikram yoga, so it was hot yoga, and they kind of wanted to test out the room and test out the space and everything. So when I took that class, I thought I was going to die. Pretty much, like it was like so hot. Again, like I'd never taken a class before. And so that was my first experience like yoga in a class. And it was pretty much like survival mechanisms sort of kicked in, right? And so like, but I made it, and I made it through. And then at the end of that class, like finishing up, I was like, I've never felt this way before in my body. And so there's something here that like I've kind of already known, but this really like solidified for me that there's a lot to be explored. So from that point, I started taking classes every day, and I would go take his classes. And I remember sitting or laying in Shavasana. And at this point, like we can go into it a little bit more, but at this point in my life, I was at like a really dark place. Drugs, alcohol, all that sort of stuff, and didn't have any direction, didn't have any sort of like path forward. And so I didn't know what I was going to do. And so I'm listening to my friend teach class, and I'm like, I could do that. I felt very called. Yeah. And so I told him, and I was like, hey, like, I'd love to go and do the teacher training. And he's like, please, I need all the help I can get right now. It was just him and his girlfriend at the time, and they were doing all the classes. And so it was about a 4 to 6 month period between the time that I decided to go to training and when the training happened. I moved to Los Angeles, did the training. It was 9 weeks. We can talk about that in detail later on.
The training, you did it in LA?
I did it in Los Angeles with Bikram himself. At that time, it was 2003. It was the most intense, insane thing that I've ever done in my life. Yeah. I'm super grateful for it. I graduated on Saturday, moved back to San Diego on Sunday, and taught my first class Monday.
At the Chula
Vista Yoga Center. And then from that point, I've been teaching pretty much every day for the last 20 years.
Yeah.
And so it's been an amazing journey. Met incredible people and been a part of so many stories. And so seeing where the next 20 years go.
I know. Well, hopefully you stay around.
I'll be here. Yeah.
So the Bikram yoga teacher training. I mean, because that's not what you teach now.
It's
right?
not.
So how has it? I mean, I remember my first Bikram yoga class. I got in trouble for stepping out of the room.
Yeah.
I was like, I can't. And the teacher was like, you step out one more time, you can't come back in. So I just, I stayed.
Yeah.
But it was so hot. Of course, I went back because something. Pues a ver, no? I can do this. But how, like, if you want to tell us a little bit about that training, but then also how did it evolve to now?
Yeah. Yeah. The training itself was intense. So the studio at that time, when Chula Vista Yoga Center first opened up, it was a Bikram studio. Okay. And so that's what we were practicing at that time. And that was my first, again, experience with yoga in a studio space. And so when I did that training, it was like insane. We had 250 people in our training. At this time, it was like when it was pretty much the height of its popularity.
250 people in the same room?
In the same room.
Okay.
It's a huge space.
A lot of energy.
That space is no longer there anymore. It was on La Cienega Boulevard in Los Angeles, in Beverly Hills. And people would come from all over the world to do this training. Like, it was really popular. And so you're in this room, and at that time, like, the room was even hotter. Like, what I was used to was like maybe like 10 degrees hotter. So like maybe 107, 115 degrees. Wow. People sweating. And we had to do 2 classes a day, every single day. So I had to move to Los Angeles for 9 weeks. And this wasn't like a 200-hour training. There was no hours at that time. So it was just basically like, they called it like the Bikram boot camp or something like that. And so he would have us there sometimes for like 12 to 14 hours every day. Like sometimes we would go home like 2, 3 in the morning because he'd just want to like lecture us and torture us. He called it the Bikram torture chamber. That's what it was. The Bikram torture chamber. And, we do 2 classes every day, lectures, posture clinics, and then Bikram would just kind of take over in the evening. And sometimes it was beautiful, like he'd sing, or he'd just talk about his time growing up in Calcutta. But all in all, it was a very amazing experience for me personally. There's a lot of stuff that did occur during my training and trainings before and after that were not ideal, and that's a whole different podcast.
Controversials.
Yeah, all that controversial stuff. I didn't see a lot of it, but I knew that it was around at a later time. But it was weird because like there were a couple times like we were in training, and just as an example, there was like one time when I came into a posture clinic and there was Bikram sitting in the middle of the room, and there was a line of girls behind him waiting to like comb his hair.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it was weird. And they would just like go up and just like comb his hair for a few minutes, and they would all just wait in line to do it. And I was like, oh, that's bizarre, but okay, go ahead. And so like you'd hear stuff like that, and then and then obviously like the stuff that went down, and that's neither here nor there.
See, no, that's the part.
That's a different thing.
About your journey,
Yeah,
not his.
yeah. So I got a lot out of that training. Like I just kind of stayed in my lane and kept my head down and did what I needed to do to get certified. And then, like I said, I finished, and then I came home, and when I went into that training, like I knew I wanted to teach. And I know a lot of the times people go into trainings where they're like, oh, I just want to learn more about yoga, or I want to deepen my practice. But for me, like I was like, I'm going to teach. This is my thing. So I definitely had that sort of mindset going in and coming out.
Is that what you started to teach?
Yes. Yeah.
And then how did you evolve to vinyasa or other forms of?
So Christian at that time was also studying other forms of yoga. And so he was like my teacher. He was like my best friend. I grew up with him. We were childhood friends. And again, like I said, he took me under his wing, and he took me to study with like Tim Miller, Stanga Yoga up in Encinitas. Okay. And then he took me to New York to study with Dharma Mittra. And so we got a lot of other styles of yoga at that time. And so I really resonated with Dharma, and I really like learned a lot from him, and sort of modeled my teaching somewhat after him, so to say, energetically. And he taught Vinyasa yoga. When we would study with Tim Miller or Ashtanga, we would do primary series, and then we would go up on Thursdays and they do sort of like an improv class, which is sort of like the birth of Vinyasa yoga. So that was really, really fun. And from that point, that's sort of like where it took off. And then we decided to change the studio from Bikram to Vinyasa. And then from that point, it was like we're teaching what we want to teach. It wasn't like we weren't teaching the Bikram yoga where it had to be the same class every single time.
Right. Yeah. That's interesting to hear that. Like the improv is kind of where vinyasa came from, right? And so for people that are listening that maybe aren't like 100% familiar with yoga and why yoga works, I mean, my experience really is that I've done yoga on and off since I was 19 years old because I did a lot of theater and music. So I was like, oh, kala yoga, and then, but it wasn't like a consistent practice until about maybe 15 years ago that I realized I can't live without this. Yeah. Something happened with my body, something happened with the breath, and I didn't really understand why, which is why then I started to do the trainings. But could you kind of maybe explain how or why it works besides the obvious, right? You're breathing to movement, you're cognitively connecting to certain parts of the body, so you're in the present moment. But so what is...
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I don't know if there's a very simple answer, but there's a couple things that people can consider, which would be that yoga is a form of movement or a modality, right? Different than other forms of exercises where the purpose and the intention is to bring you into yourself, which means that yoga identifies with every part of who you are as not just a human being, but a being, meaning that it taps into the energetic, the mental, the emotional, the spiritual, and the physical. So there's sort of 5 parts that all combine together to form who we are as people, as human beings. And yoga is the only modality that really addresses each part of those things. And the beauty is that it does it kind of all at once and without people really even knowing that it's happening. So in asana, yoga has, when you look at yoga is much more than just physical postures. There's 8 limbs, and we get into a lot of that stuff when you go into deeper, like you said, trainings and so on. But asana itself uses the physical body to tap into the mental, spiritual, physical, and emotional. And it's sort of like a vessel or a vehicle or a tool to get into those parts of who we are and potentially untangle, unbind, release certain things that may have been in there that we are not aware of. And so that's why it has such an impact. And in my experience, it has such an immediate impact. Like I said, when I took that first class, like I never felt anything like that before. And I think that's a benefit of yoga, is that like people come into the class and they leave feeling a certain way and they don't really know why or how or what, but they just feel better. And so that to me is like the beauty of it. It's very simplistic, but again, like it's because it's tapping into physical, spiritual, mental, emotional, and energetic all at the same time.
Yeah, and it's interesting how you don't really. I mean, so it sounds so simple, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. Maybe I just like to complicate things. But I always wanted to know specifically why, and then now, 20 years later, however many years later, I realize I don't even care why.
Yeah.
All I know is it works.
Yeah.
And like you guys, I know you're doing the yoga teacher training here coming up in March.
Yes,
right?
we started March.
In South Park Yoga and Chula Vista Yoga Center.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, if you can tell us a little bit about that, but I just want to say first that when I took my first yoga teacher training many years ago, it was like a parteaguas. I was really struggling with, well, of course, I got to yoga more like every day. I used to do yoga here and there when I was pregnant, all my life.
Yeah.
Yoga clase aquí y acá. But really hardcore when I was just really struggling with all this stress at work. I worked for the Federal Public Defender's Office, it was such an intense, like everyone coming across the border, illegal immigration, horrible. And we were helping them, right? We weren't prosecutors, we were helping them.
Sure.
So I started to go like yoga. But then I hit a wall with, I guess, a little bit of the existentialism of like, what is happening with all of this spiritual. I also grew up Catholic, and I was kind of struggling with, is it real, is it not real? But you have the kids and all your family's like, ¿lo vas a bautizar? Blah, blah. I'm like, I don't know, I don't really know, like who cares,
Yeah.
But when I did my first yoga teacher training, I really was able to, I already kind of knew what was up, but in a yoga teacher training, I really connected to just this knowing. Yeah. It was beyond the philosophy. It was beyond the teachings. The teachings are common sense. Yeah. Clean up the inside. Don't be an asshole.
Yeah.
Right?
Very much so.
But it was so transformational for me to be in there 9 weeks, just practicing and reading and practicing and meditating and really getting into this, I guess como, what do you call it? Like, not a technique, but when you do things every day.
A habit.
A habit. Of realizing like everything's brighter. Like I'm not, I can hold space even when I'm in a bad mood. I'm not losing I'm able to realize, no, you breathe. I really held the breath through that horrible pose so I could breathe through this intense moment. So I really recommend, even if, I always knew I wanted to teach too. Yeah. But even if you don't want to teach, it's such a beautiful space for coming in and having this transformation. Yeah. Right?
When did you do your training and where?
Well, I did several.
Okay.
One in Core Power Yoga.
Okay.
And I think it was in 2016 or something like that. And then the second one, I did the 300-hour at Mira Mesa College. But then I also took another 200-hour with Yogananda from Playa del Carmen.
Oh, wow.
Teacher at Morania, yeah.
Wow.
And they remind me of you. These teachers. Sure. Like the first class I took with her, I was just blown away. Because Core Power Yoga is great. Yeah. But it's more like exercise. Sure. And, Mesa College was good, but it was also like, whatever. Yeah. I wanted to get the 300 hours and I wanted to practice and I wanted to have to practice. Yeah. But when I did the one in Mexico with these teachers, and maybe it's because I'm Mexican, I don't know. These guys would go back and forth to India and they're just so... I took the first class with her and it just blew my mind, because she does a lot of breathing like you do,
Sure.
a lot of meditation in between.
Uh-huh.
And when I ended, I think she just saw me and she turns to me and she's like, "Esto es yoga."
Wow.
I was like, "Oh my God, I thought I was in core power," And,
Yeah.
all props to core power, but
Of course.
however you enter,
Yes.
even if it's through goat yoga,
Of course.
but
Yeah.
but yeah, so that's when I realized this is so much more profound,
Yeah.
and it's people complain that they can't do it because they see all these ads in the magazine, people up, and it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You might get there, you might not.
Yeah.
But just show up,
Of course.
right?
Yeah.
Show up to Hanno's class.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I always say. The hardest part is showing up.
Yeah.
For the people that aren't familiar with the Chula Vista Yoga Center, for example, we're on East Street, which is a very busy street. And so there's cars driving by that studio all day long, every day. And so I would hear so many times, I've driven by this space so many times, and I've always wondered what's going on. And there are people who come in for the first time, and it's like, I finally decided to come in, but I've driven by this place for years. And so you hear that thing, and so yeah, you're right. The most important thing is to just show up. And I always tell people when they're in the classes, like, do the best that you can today. And you know what I mean? And just, you're going to get the benefit no matter what. Yeah. By you being in that space, whether it's just energetically, whether it's emotionally, whatever is going to occur for you is going to happen. And there's not a lot of effort that needs to really happen. Right. But yeah, I think that there is something that's profound that does happen in the practice with a lot of people, and it is something that forms a habit because you feel like you're achieving something beneficial for yourself. You're really doing something good for yourself. Yeah. And I think that's why people come so often and so consistently. And yeah, you're only going to get so much out of a class that you take at a studio for an hour. Right. And so that's why it is important if you are interested in learning more about what yoga is and what it provides and the real intricacies of yoga, I always recommend doing teacher trainings. And yes, we are having one coming up in March. And this is going to be a unique one. I've done, I've lost count, but I think that this is my either 17th or 18th teacher training that I've done. And I've certified hundreds of people, and it's amazing to see the sort of places that these teachers reach. And I always tell them, when they're in the training, they're like, I say to them, I'm only going to be able to get to so many people. It's up to you to get to the people that I'm not going to get to. And just like my teacher would say that to me. So it's a beautiful thing to see people really take up that call and go out and create, you know what I mean? Following and really take the teaching to heart, you know what I mean? But yeah, there's something to be said for teachers that have a certain level of authenticity, and I think that definitely comes with time and experience. I mean, this is 20 years for me, and so I've had plenty of time to practice what I'm doing. So I think that there's something to be said for that. Anybody does anything for that long, they should have a sense of what they're doing. Sure. But yeah, it's been amazing to see people go through the trainings and the transformations that they go through, and then to see them really carry on that sort of that flag. Yeah.
So you do 1 weekend in South Park, 1 week in South Park, 1 week in Chula Vista, or how does that work?
Yeah, this is going to be unique. So this is the first time I've ever done a training at 2 studios, which is amazing. I'm really excited about it. And yeah, we're going to do 9 weeks. And the way that we're going to schedule it will be at Studio A, which would be, let's say, Chula Vista Yoga Center, Friday, Saturday, and then South Park Sunday. Okay. And then the following week will be South Park Friday, Saturday, and Chula Vista Sunday. So we'll be at both studios each weekend.
And remember, when you take a yoga teacher training, you get access to the studio. So
absolutely,
you get to go to all the other classes.
Yeah. Part of the training is people have to take 60 classes throughout the 9 weeks, and you get a membership to both studios. for that duration of time. So you'll have access to a lot of teachers. And just real quick as a plug,
Yeah.
we have our information meeting coming up this Saturday at South Park Studio, free to attend. We just kind of go over the curriculum and all that stuff. And that'll be at 11 a.m. You can come by, ask questions, and get more information on the training.
And this Saturday, I was checking the calendar. It's
Yep.
18th.
The 18th.
Saturday, February 18th.
Yep.
Come by here in South Park.
Correct.
Yeah. You know, another thing that I thought was really, really cool, and I think this is amazing because I come from a background of, como te dije, Catholic, but I always thought it was a bunch of baloney. So I always rebelled. I always thought, no. But you know, the programming is deep.
Of course.
So no matter what, you're still like, well, just in case.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
And then I got into like, you know, different philosophies and meditation. And then I fell back into it a little bit when I had the babies because, you know.
Sure.
And then I came back out of it. But I always thought it was really, I think what people are seeking is community. You know, because for us, like going to church was like, well, we're all going together.
Yeah.
And we're going to hang out and there's going to be great music. And then the preacher would start talking and I was like, oh my God, what are we doing here? But then afterwards it was so fun.
Yeah.
There was picnic and this and that.
Yeah.
And so when I saw that you did these church services, or Sunday service.
Sunday services. Yeah.
And you know, Marcela posted it, and I saw the drumming, and I was like, no way, we gotta go. So Julio and I went to your Sunday service, which I thought was fabulous.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So this was an idea that sort of like was something that I took from my teacher, Dharma Mittra, and he would do like these things called like Maha Sadhana, where it was just like a celebration. Yeah. It was like he came actually to our yoga studio. Dharma Mittra is a beautiful soul. He's I think 83 years old and lives in New York. Yeah. And
I follow him.
He's amazing. I'm actually gonna go take class with him in 2 weeks. I'm really excited about that. But he came to Chula Vista and he did like a workshop at our studio. And so he taught a class, and the class was like 2 hours, and he did a talk, and it was beautiful. And then after was like this whole like celebration where like everybody was just in the room. We had kids and like people, just like random people. And we had all these mats set up, and so everybody could just jump on a mat and just do whatever they wanted to do. So it's kind of like you could show off and do some really cool stuff. And then we had drummers there, and so like, and that's where the idea obviously came from. And so from that point, I just decided to kind of create this honor sort of towards him with the Sunday service. And I start with sort of like a talk, and we do just kind of a little bit of like some of the same stuff that we talk about in a teacher training. I do like a lot of lectures, and then we'll do a yoga class, and then it's just like we'll drum and like play and like play yoga. You know, it's very playful. So I was doing those pre-pandemic quite often, and then once the pandemic hit, obviously like we weren't able to do that, and so now I'm trying to get that ball rolling again.
Yeah, next time I'm bringing 20 people.
Yeah.
It was great.
Yeah, it's super fun.
I mean, you had live musicians there.
Yeah.
With the loops and doing the really cool stuff. And you were playing on the drums.
Yeah.
And people would come up, and at first it was like, well, do I just go up to the middle and do yoga? Like, no say. Like, but it's also like an invitation, to play. Yeah. And to be free, and to, I think one of the main things that I've come to, number one, learn, and number two, really teach, and it's like you have to enjoy your body.
Oh yeah.
You know, and like, it's como una expresión. For me, the body's like an expression of just the gratitude to be alive. You know, and that's what happens with yoga.
Oh, of course. Like
I come in here, I would practice, or even in my room when there was just pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, I always practice, even if it's a little bit in my room. It just felt like just such an act of devotion. Yeah. It's like prayers to me.
Of course.
You know?
Yeah.
And you breathe in and you exhale, and next thing you know, you're like, it's like a whole adventure.
Yeah.
And I find that, you know, this is something that you bring to the studio when you teach. No?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, and I appreciate that. That's really profound and depth and deep. You know, my teacher Dharma would always say, make every posture a prayer as an offering, you know, to whatever it is that you believe in, you know what I mean? Or whatever ideal you have, like surrender it to the Lord, he would say. And so I've always kind of had that in my mind. So like there's a couple of really interesting things that I want to kind of share is that yoga has a lot of information. A lot of people have written a lot of things about yoga. And you can read a book, you can, jump on the internet and do a lot of research and learn a lot about yoga. Sort of like what you're talking about is like the experience of actually practicing the yoga is where the difference is. And it's because we're using our physical bodies to sort of tap into something that's within us that we may be disconnected from.
Right.
And I think that's what's really so impactful about the practice is that like you touch and connect and reconnect with parts of who you are. And the playfulness of it is like you reconnect to like that child, right? That childlike wonder and awe and like just like joy of just being, right? You look at a child and they're just so happy to just be alive, right?
Yeah.
And we lose a lot of that. And so yoga, I'm not saying that yoga brings you to that place, but it taps you back into that.
Yeah.
It reconnects you to some of that. And the other thing is that like my teacher Dharma would always say that like the true teachings of yoga cannot be spoken about, cannot be taught. They have to be transmitted psychically, which is I think something that I have in my mind intentionally. And so like you may not hear me speak about a lot of spirituality, but a lot of that transmits through just psychic energy, right? Just energetically.
Yeah.
And I think it's something that I believe has an impact on my students. When they come into that space, they feel a sense of spirituality where I'm not in there talking about God, the whole time.
Yeah. No, that's one of the things that I like. I'm like, Julian, le digo, Jano isn't in there telling stories and talking about it. He just gets to the point, starts breathing, the mantra purification, and all of a sudden, and every time at the end of class, it's like, what in the hell happened here?
Wow.
It's just so profound, and it's a simple class.
Sure.
I mean, I do rocket yoga, I wear Ashtanga Konani, and those are all great. But I've also found, and this is what I tell a lot of people that I work with too, it's like, like yoga isn't just acrobatics and Ashtanga. It's just getting there, and when you find, and I know it's not always about the teacher, it's about one person, but when you do find a teacher like you that transmit that, it totally makes sense now.
Yeah.
Es que sí es cierto.
Yeah.
I get there, sometimes I get there in a bad mood, sometimes I'm like, yay, class, sometimes like, nobody talk to me. But it always, just as long as you show up, there's this transformation. So
yeah,
and I don't think, I mean, I'm very grateful for that. I haven't taken it lately. This is why I'm like, maybe Hannah should do a retreat with us.
Yeah.
Because I know you used to work with, I've seen you go to like Sacred Sons, another men's group. How'd you get into that?
I had followed the Sacred Sons just through Instagram, and I was always just like, oh man, they're doing really amazing work. And I just had an opportunity to go to one of their excursions or retreats here locally, and it just was like very impactful. And from that point on, I was like, oh, I need to be doing men's work too. So I do men's work with my friend Donnie Starkins and Keith Donahue up at Trilogy Sanctuary here in La Jolla in San Diego. And we do men's circle yoga gatherings. And we're trying to be consistent on a monthly basis, but that work is powerful to be able to just connect with other men and sort of break down these barriers and break down these walls and break down these identities that we're supposed to have, right? And just really tap into like men and speak to them and say like, hey, it's okay, you know what I mean, to be emotional. It's okay to like, to express yourself in an emotional way, sort of. And so that work in itself is very, very powerful, and I'm very passionate about it. So we're continuing to do that work.
And it's so cool to see because women's circles are all over the place.
Sure.
But the men's circles are not as, I know there's a bunch, but maybe it's not just mainstream or not as accessible. And, to normalize it, because
Yeah.
you can cry, you can tap into it, you can feel, you
Yeah.
can connect in a more intimate level.
Of course.
That's really cool.
Yeah, I think that women in my sort of like experience have always been able to connect with each other in such a deep way. And men, we have that, but it's not like on that sort of emotional level, unless you have like a real brother, you know what I mean? Like somebody that's like a real brother. But women, like they can get together and like, there's a lot of community within women in itself. And so I think with men, we sort of miss out on that. And so like, I think that taking that example of like, hey, like, let's just get together and talk and listen and be heard and be able to express ourselves in a way where we're not feeling judged or like we have to do this to get better at that, is very powerful. So it's very liberating. And again, like, I'm really excited about that work and continuing it.
Yeah. Which is part of the circles we're going to also have at the retreat. I've been doing retreat for so long, and it's always like, there's always 10 or a few men saying, well, what's up with the man? It's a woman. What's up with the man? It's a woman. And I just never felt like it was my, I don't know. But now I'm realizing it's so important, and now to bring this balancing together. So it'll be Jano and Julio and, Virgil. There'll be other people coming on here on the podcast that will be supporting the worked, I like to call it the worked male energy.
Yeah.
Trabajada. Like connected to, like, embodied, balanced out. And so, yeah, it's going to be great. I was going to ask you one more thing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really excited about the retreat in itself, like to be able to like bring that masculine, positive masculine identity and energy to that space in those circles. But you're right, like in my experience within just the yoga community, it's 80% female and 20% male, because again, like that work in itself is emotional, energetic. Those parts of, as men, those parts of us that we tend to like suppress and disassociate with and not identify with because of toxic masculinity and all of those things that we've been conditioned to be as we were brought up
in the culture.
Of course.
Yeah. And it's just such important work. And just as it's important work for, I think, like, the more I see guys like you and even Julio coming up through this and all these other men, it helps the women that are really angry. Like, I've been really angry.
Sure.
Growing up, like, you can't do this, you can't do that, you have to wear dress, you have to, and then saying, no, I'm going to do what I want. And yes, you do what you want and you have all your rights, but also it's really a lot of work to just be having to push.
Sure.
I want to be, and I've learned to be like softer and being held, and just, I don't want to be in that masculine all the time.
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah.
La neta me cansa.
Yeah. And I think you're right. Like, I think that as a culture in our current time, I feel like women, like you're saying, have had to step up and hold that masculine component down, because you have a lot of men that grew up, for example, like myself, like I grew up without a father. You have a lot of men who didn't have role models, who didn't have somebody that could say like, hey, this is what it is to be a man. We have like all the ideas of what it is to be a man that we were fed, through media, through television and movies. And so like, you have this whole idea of like, you have to be strong, you have to be macho, and you lose a part of who you are as a human being, right? And so when you get to this place where like you're in a relationship or you're in a community, like you're not bringing your whole self to the table, and other people have to carry that weight for you. So as a leader, like in a family, in a household, if you're not leading, because that is masculine to lead, if you're not leading in a healthy, positive way, then everybody else has to carry that load. and it falls upon usually the woman in the family, right? The wife or the partner, and they have to carry these sort of masculine traits, and it's like you said, it's tiring, it's exhausting. And so like this men's work is to like call men out, and not necessarily like call them out in a negative way, but like say like, hey, like what do we need to do to improve like our social structure within the places that we can have the impact on the most, which is our families and our communities. What are we lacking? What aren't we doing? What aren't we aware of? What aren't we seeing as men within ourselves that we're putting that load on to everybody else around us?
Yeah, and also because of what when you were saying, some of that load doesn't just always fall on the woman, but like on the kids.
Of course.
You know.
Absolutely.
And the kids are like so worried about this imbalance because you can tell, you can breathe the energetics of course. When you're a kid. I mean, I know I did.
Yeah.
So.
They take the collateral damage.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like it's like they're innocent bystanders in the scope of a man and a woman trying to like create a family and live in a community, right? And so as men, we want to be examples to our children, and it's not necessarily like, you know, my son's 14 and I can tell him till I'm blue in the face like what I think he should be doing or what I think he should be thinking, but like I can only lead by example by showing him. Right. And I hope at one point he can see me and be like, oh, I see what you were doing. I see that now. Right. You know what I mean? And like that's all I can do. I can obviously like teach him and show him and speak with him and connect with him, right? But I have to lead by example. Yeah. For sure. But yeah, the kids are the ones that like they take the brunt of it.
They take it all in. I know. So it's important work, and it's so funny because I was thinking there's two things that I was thinking, like I get really nervous when I'm going to run a retreat, because it's like 20 something people.
Sure.
Is it going to be enough people to help? But every time I'm in there, and I imagine this happens to a lot of people, right? Like, oh my God, why do I even do this? Because it's so much to contain.
Yeah.
And my retreats aren't necessarily like resting, love, and light.
Yeah.
We're going in to do the work. Because I think it's important that we need to do transformation. There's lots of rest and containment and compassion, but let's go.
Yeah.
You don't have time to waste.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, like, in the middle, right before the retreat started, that I just finished this last weekend. I don't know if I can do the one in May. I don't know if I can, And then the retreat happened, and then Sunday, the first thing I was like, oh my gosh, collateral, what else are we going to do with our lives?
Yeah.
If we're not, and this retreat is called the Village Ways.
Yes.
And I specifically figured that name because I'm going to bring a village together who's doing the work and who wants to do this change in consciousness for the community. So, right, like Jano, the yoga teacher, part of the village, Julia, my partner, part of the village, because we've been creating this community of gathering. And then, Sergio, my friend, who's this amazing chef, and Virgil, Shamanakua, who was a medicine, my friends from Mexico City that are, they work with plant medicines, and they do a lot of work on plant integration, psychedelic integration therapies, and the DJ. So it's like this whole bringing this community together of, I guess they're my friends, but really people that are aware that what else are we going to do if we're not offering a service to try to make it better for the people that are, not just for us and our friends and people that are coming, but for those that are coming up, like your 14-year-old son. Yeah. And my 17-year-old son. Yeah. And their kids. Yeah. And their kids and their kids. Right. So it's so now I'm excited. I always get a little nervous.
Of course. Of course.
But it's a beautiful space. It's this private beach with a super cool yoga studio, and it's the Mascal, right 10-minute walk from there, and we're gonna have live music, and you're gonna bring your drums, right?
Yeah, I'll bring a drum. Drumming. Of course.
Lots of drumming. So that'll be exciting. And I'm going to put all the links on this podcast for Jano's Instagram, webpage, and the yoga teacher training, and the retreat sign up, and everything. And you can follow Jano so that you can know when these men groups are happening. Yeah. Send it to your partners.
Yes.
Para que vayan.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else you want to?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I'm really excited to be a part of that community, to be able to like bring in and I think that what you're saying, like you do these retreats, and like it's like, man, it's so much work and it's so much going into it, but like it's the work that's done there that like has an impact on people, and like it's transformational. And I think that is what is like rewarding. Like we wouldn't be doing this type of work if we didn't get something from it. You know what I mean? And I think that like for me, the transformation that is occurring within myself is that I get to like share space with beautiful people and see people's journeys and see people's like lives and really get an authentic look at human beings.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I think that is just like tremendous and such a beautiful, beautiful like blessing and gift.
That's true.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess yeah, you're right. I don't think about how incredibly powerful it has been for me to show up to some of these retreats
Mm-hmm.
that I've been to, or the trainings I've
Yeah.
been to, or doing specific workshops that I come home like, whoa, that was so powerful.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and it's true that not everybody has, like, there are 2 or 3 girls that went to this last retreat,
Mm-hmm.
especially one called me already, like, when is the May one? I have to go.
Yeah.
Just the power of moving to breath and being, we
Mm.
teach a lot of embodiment and
Mhm.
trauma and but yoga is embodiment, you guys. Yoga is todo lo que es, but
Yep.
not todo lo que es, but I have this idea that people think you're going to be up in this bliss, and it's like, everything's through the body.
Yeah.
At least right now it is.
It is. You're right. At least right now it is.
Who knows where we're going, and you can tap into those moments.
Sure.
But feel your toes,
Mhm.
your nose,
Yeah.
send it, feel your heart,
Yeah.
listen to that breath,
Mhm.
and then come back to the present, because all of this spiritual bypassing, and
Yeah.
I can do these meditations, and I go all the way to Hawaii and back, and okay, but I really enjoy washing the dishes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just looking out the window, and there's this plant, just
Yeah.
so it's through the body,
Yeah.
and I guess it's through this work and through these practices that you get to see it so simple.
Yeah.
Or at least that's what's happened for me.
Of course. I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. My pleasure.
So, thank you everybody for listening. I don't know how long we've been here, but I appreciate you listening. I appreciate you guys showing up and sharing this podcast. Send it to your friends. Follow Jano. Sign up for the retreat. Sign up for the yoga teacher training. And we'll see you guys next time.